Pay an extra $70 a month to save Social Security forever? It's literally as simple as that, my friends, and I'm going to share with you today directly from the Trustees report, not hearsay, not third-party knowledge that you're hearing from some of the negative Nellies out there, directly from the Trustees report, all right? So that way you know it's from the horse's mouth, the people who are responsible and hopefully doing their due diligence, and I have no reason to suspect they're not, for making sure Social Security stays there and solvent for the vast majority of us to receive the benefits for which we put in. It's literally as simple as that. And so hopefully this will shed some light. I highly invite you to read the 2018 OASDI Trustees report as well. Now, OASDI is the Old Age Survivor and Disability Income Trustees report. That's Social Security Old Age and Survivors, kind of like the retirement benefit. And DI is the disability benefit. All right, so I invite you to read it. I know most won't, but that's, look, you're going to hear a lot of noise about Social Security, lots and lots of noise. And I wish that, I hope the noise doesn't scare you, simply because it's just noise. It's noise by a lot of doomsayers on both sides of the equation. Some want to scare you into a death to say we got to get rid of private pensions or private 401k accounts and let the government take care of it because the government can't do it. Other people scare you on the other side that Social Security is the worst thing since sliced bread. It's a Ponzi scheme. It's going bankrupt. I mean, all that stuff is just it's doom and gloom, and it could not be further from the truth. So first, I want to give a shout out to Devin, my man Devin Carroll down there in Texarkana. He had a video the other day I think was critical watching. I think it was last week. He talked about the 3 different phases of the Social Security Trustees report: the low cost, the intermediate, and the high cost in terms of their presumptions going forward. I had never known that, and that piqued my interest, and thus I'm doing this video after I read it. And I thought that was very, very interesting. So shout out to Devin because that was incredibly enlightening for sure in terms of how the Social Security Trustees report is actually how they actually look at the numbers. So let's start with the bottom here, and this is the conclusion. The trustees recommend that lawmakers address the projected trust fund shortfalls in a timely manner in order to phase in necessary changes gradually and give workers and beneficiaries time to adjust them. Implementing changes sooner rather than later would allow more generations to share in the needed revenue increases or reduction in scheduled benefits and could preserve more trust fund reserves to help finance future benefits. So now here's the critical thing. Social Security will play a critical role in the lives of 63 million beneficiaries and 175 million covered workers and their families during 2018. It's a big deal, man. Big deal. With informed discussion, Social Security can continue to protect future generations. And I 100% agree with that. So let's go out and I'm going to tell you how I got that $70 a month. It's literally that simple. Under current law, the projected cost of Social Security increases faster than projected income through 2039, primarily because the ratios of workers paying taxes to beneficiaries receiving benefit will decline. All right, so more people receiving benefit, less people paying into the system. That's not good. But I just want to show you something. I'm going to show you some graphs on this as well. Let's keep going. I'll show you here in just a second. So based on the trustees' intermediate assumption, again, another big one here because you got low cost, intermediate, and high cost. Social Security's cost exceeds total income throughout the 75-year projection. I'm telling you, everyone and their mom thinks that means it's going bankrupt when they hear that. It's simply not true. It's not any different than if you're living off $50,000 a year while you're working, and then you retire and you still need $50,000 a year to live on, but you're only getting $40,000 from Social Security. Well, you need $10,000 from some other place. Well, you're going to take that $10,000 from your retirement accounts. That's exactly what the Social Security Trust Fund is. The Social Security Trust Fund is $3 trillion as we sit here today. So now that the cost, which is since I think 2015, has exceeded the income coming in, there's a deficit. And because of that deficit, we're dapping into our principal, no different than a retiree. And we can continue doing that until 2034 when the trust fund will be exhausted. All right, so the OASI Trust Fund and the DI Trust Fund are projected to have sufficient reserves to pay full benefits until 2034 and 2032. Legislation action will need to be taken to prevent reserve depletion in those years. In the absence of such legislation, continuing income to the trust fund at the time of the reserve depletion would be sufficient to pay 77% of the benefits and 90 of this the retirement benefits and 96% of disability benefits. All right, so now the 75-year actuarial deficit for the combined trust funds under the intermediate assumption is 2.84% of taxable payroll. To illustrate the magnitude of the deficit, and here's the catcher, the kicker. Consider that for the combined trust funds, because there are two different trust funds. You got the Disability Trust Fund and the Old Age and Survivor Income Trust Fund. Essentially, the Old Age and Survivor Income has a couple more years staying power before its reserves are depleted. So law needs to be taken in order to allow them to kind of share the resources. But for both the combined trust funds to remain solvent throughout the 75-year projection period, revenues would need to be increased by an amount equivalent to an immediate and permanent payroll tax of 2.78 percentage points, which would put us at 15.18. 2.8 percentage points. Half that is your employer, half that is you. So we take our trusty calculator and we divide 2.878 by 2, because again, half is coming out of your pocket, half is coming out of your pocket, the employer's pocket. Your tax increase is 1.39%. On a median household, 1.39% on $60,000, so $60,000, which is the median household income in the United States today, times 1.39% is the equivalent of $834. $834 divided by 12, $69.50 is what you'd have to pay in tax increase in order for Social Security to remain solvent. $70 for everybody. Now, some if you make $100,000, you'll pay more. You'll pay about $100. Some if you make $40,000, you'll pay less. $70 is the median cost to fix Social Security forever. Now, the employer's got to pay $70 as well. I get that, absolutely. But that's it, man. Destitute? Quick fix? Yeah. Should we do it? Yeah, absolutely. So the interesting thing is, the people who sit there and say there's not enough, the Social Security is going bankrupt, Social Security this, Social Security that, if that's true, then it's simply not true, because we know for a fact, even with the cost and basically exceeding the income is still enough to give us roughly 75 to 80% of benefits up until age 2092. And then in 2092, just based on the intermediate assessment of Social Security future projections, it still has enough to pay 74 cents on the dollar 72 years from now. So 2092, Social Security, with nothing done, has enough to pay 74 cents on the dollar. That's not a bankrupt system, my friends. Is it bad because it can only pay 74 cents on the dollar 72 years from now? Sure. Is it bankrupt? No, not in the least. All right. So what else could they do? They could schedule benefits. Scheduled benefits could be reduced by an amount equivalent to an immediate and permanent reduction of about 17% applied to all. That's not going to happen. Or 21% if the reductions were applied only to those who were initially eligible in 2018. It's simply not going to happen. Or some combinations could be taken. All right. So, or you just say, just raise the payroll tax by 2.78% on the employer and the employee, and we're done. We can move on. But that's only under the immediate assumption. So I want to pause for a second, because I want to show you how this works. You got three different assumptions, and I'll share with you here in just a second how Social Security works when they're forwarding the projections based on that. Under the intermediate assumption, all right, now that is a 5.5% unemployment rate, by the way, just FYI. We're not there today. We are not. It's 4? But under the intermediate assumptions, which is a significantly high unemployment rate, we still have enough Social Security to pay 79 cents on the dollar in 2034, and then in 2092, 74 cents on the dollar. That is not doom and gloom. And if we just raise the payroll tax by $70 a pop to the average, the median worker and the median employer, we're done. We don't have to have this conversation more. So if you're looking at a doom and gloom scenario, I highly ask you to stop twice. Think twice, because it's not doom and gloom. All right, let's go to another page. I'm going to tell you what I'm talking about. This will be interesting, so stay with me here. So I think it's important for you to understand how they're projecting their future financial status for Social Security. And again, Social Security is all-encompassing OASDI, disability income, and Social Security retirement benefits as well. So again, this is another part of the Trustees report, section D, projections of future financial status. So I want to show you a couple things. And I want to show you first and foremost right here. The projected trust fund ratios under the intermediate assumptions, and stay with me because we'll talk about what that means, because that plays a big role in this. Under intermediate assumptions for the OASI trust fund exceed 100% throughout the short range period. Therefore, OASI, old age survivor income, satisfies a trustee's short-term test of financial adequacy. So right now, the short term is financially adequate. The disability trust fund fails the short-term test of financial adequacy, however, because it doesn't have 100% of assets in the, so right here, increases because they only have 62%, all right? So basically, the Social Security, we want to have 100%, essentially, we want enough in a savings account to be able to pay the liabilities that are coming. And so Social Security Trust Fund has 330% of potential liabilities, where the disability income only has 62%, if that makes sense. So right now, the disability is inadequately funded for what the trustees fund is trying to say for short-term projections, if that makes sense. That doesn't mean it's bankrupt. It just means it doesn't have enough for them to feel comfortable on the short-term projections to cover most short-term contingencies. Okay, so let's take a look at this. So here's a short range of OASI and DI that's combined. So right now, the OASI is propping up the DI here in terms of the combined trust fund ratios. They want a minimum level of 100% for short-term financial adequacy, and they don't have that on the DI, but they have well more than that on the OASI. So here we are in 2018 right there, just shy of $3 trillion. So we have 300% fully funded, and they're trying to have 100% fully funded. So we are 3 times the amount for short-term adequacy on the OASI, but we're still only 62% on the DI. So 62% has some short-term issues in terms of funding adequacy. Asset reserves, all right, to pay as a percentage of annual costs. And so for the OASI, they're fine until 2000. You can see well beyond 2027 before it runs lower than the 100%, and that happens to coincide with when the fund is depleted. Now, I want to show you something though, because everyone hears the fund depleted. Oh my goodness! I just want to show you here. All right, so here, this is what's interesting to me. I'll come back to that. This one right here. All right, so here is the cost in the dark line, and you can see, and here's the income, non-interest income. So here's the cost. And the income is from payroll taxes, non-interest income. All right, so if you go to the banks, you'll understand what non-interest income is. Banks look at interest income primarily because that's what they get when they loan money out. Social Security is just looking at payroll taxes. So the cost is dark, and until 2009, the cost was lower than the income. All right, so cost was lower than the income, which meant we were running surpluses. 2010 and beyond, you can see the cost begins to creep up each and every year above that of income. Costs kind of rises pretty significantly until about 2040, then it flatlines, I imagine, because a lot of the baby boomers are dying off at that point after they receive a significant amount of benefits, probably from right about here to there. The baby boomers are getting lots of benefits right there, and then they start dying off. My generation comes up behind us. There's not that many of us relative to what we are paying for us paying forward to the baby boomers. It's just not that big of a deal because we had just the opposite of a baby boom, a baby bust, I think. And so you can see there, then the cost flatlines, but either way, it's still significantly higher than the income coming in, all right, the payroll tax. Is that a big deal? Well, let's take a look. All right, so here's a maximum projected trust fund for OASI, so the old age and survivor income is 330%. And the year attained is 2018, all right? In the year 2019, the DI disability income is going to go below the 100% is what they're trying to show for adequacy. And projected year of trust fund depletion in the Social Security, the OASI, is 2034, with disability is 2032. At that point, there's not any money they can dip into to tap in. They can't tap into your principal because the principal's gone. At that point, it's just like if you're working, you need $50,000 a year in income. You're only making $40,000 a year from Social Security, so you're pulling the $10,000 a year from your retirement account. That retirement account is depleted in 2034, yet you still need 50,000 a year in income. Where does that 10,000 come from? Well, you're gonna have to reduce your income needs. That's all there is to it, which is what we're saying here. All right, but let's keep going down. I think this is interesting. So here is number of covered workers per beneficiary. All right, so now here's 1980. So everyone always said we had 16 workers per beneficiary when it first started. I used to say that as a way to say don't rely on Social Security. And I was a CFP with a master's degree talking that smack. But look, in 1980, we only had, 3.2 workers? All right, so now in 2018, we got about 2.8 workers. Then in 2090, you'll have about 2. All right, so, I mean, again, that sounds brutal until you recognize a couple things going on is that the taxes that we used to have when we had 16 workers were minuscule compared to the taxes they are now. And now at this point, the baby boomers are all dead, and so you don't need that many workers for beneficiary because the taxes will be higher, as assuredly they will. And on top of that, there just isn't many beneficiaries because the baby bust. But either way, we still have adequacy to fund without doing anything 79% of the promised benefit until 2092. All right, let's keep going down. All right, so we talked about this before, the cost. We talked about the trust fund. Now here's the interesting thing. These are the unfunded liabilities that my man Larry Kotlikoff talks about. And again, under the intermediate assumption, I'm going to dive into the intermediate assumption here next chart, next page I'll look at. Trust fund reserves. So right now we got a little bit less than 3 trillion. And right then is when it depletes, right there, 2034. The DI depletes right there in 2032. So at that point, we no longer have capital for which we can tap into principal to pay off the benefits. Then unfunded obligations, without anything changing under intermediate assumption, at 2092, in today's numbers, we're going to have $13 trillion of unfunded liabilities if nothing changes. All right, so that's bad. So how are we going to pay that? Well, the longer we wait, the more, because they can't just fund liabilities with a printing press. I mean, it can, but that'd be silly because you can't do that. At some point, you have to actually have the income coming in. So the longer we wait, the more the unfunded liabilities are, the more likely it's going to be that either A, they're going to have to make drastic changes and cuts and or increases in taxes. They're never going to make changes and cuts or get the print press out there to basically cover the debts, and they're not going to do that either. So the only thing is they got to do something ASAP to reduce the future problems of Social Security beneficiaries and how much taxes or funding cuts will need to be made. Because at this point, $13 trillion of unfunded liabilities, someone's going to have to take the hit there, and they're not going to wait that long. All right, let's keep going. This is what's interesting. So I want to show you a couple things on this. Let's see if they talk about it. Yeah, they talk about intermediate. Oh, bear with me just a second. Okay, they don't talk about it here, but I want to show it to you. I'm going to talk about what happens with Social Security. They use 3 different assessments. Low cost, intermediate, and high cost. Low cost basically is, I tell you what, let me pause for just, let me show you this chart first, and I'll show you what the low cost, intermediate, and high cost is. And what we can see here is that, and this is the intermediate of 2. So in 2034, the long range Social Security combined trust fund ratios under alternate scenarios is gone. In 2034 is gone. In 2030 is gone with high cost scenarios, right? But under a low, I'm sorry, this is 2034 is gone under intermediate scenarios, which is what Social Security uses for their projections. 2030 is gone under high cost scenarios, which I'll share with you. So see how close that is between the two, but it never goes away under low cost scenarios. Isn't that interesting? Low cost scenarios, it stays fully funded forever, literally forever, without doing anything, without increasing taxes. So it's kind of interesting that intermediate, which is what we're using, is 2034. The high cost scenario is 2030 when the funds are depleted, but yet on the low cost scenario, it never goes away. It's there forever. Isn't that kind of interesting? So I want to show you here. This right here I thought was pretty interesting. It actually, it's because 2018 was a pretty good year. It actually has some added a little bit to the solvency. And what you can see here is that we have in 2015, basically what they're doing is they're annual balances on 2017 and 2018 trustees report as a percentage of taxable payroll. So in 2015, the annual balance was much lower than as a percentage of annual payments, but now 2008 going forward based on a 2018 trustees report is higher, if that makes sense. And that's just because a little bit of a kick in the economy and using the assumptions a little bit differently for intermediate. Now it's lower in 2025 it breaks even. So the 2017 report and the 2018 report were basically tracking each other until about 2025, but then the 2018 report is a little bit more favorable to Social Security because 2017 and their projections going forward are a little bit more favorable for GDP and things like that. All right, so let me show you what these numbers mean, the three things. So that's critical. So let me pause for just a second, and I can go back to the next chart. Here's where the rubber hits the road. I mean, we're projecting into the future, the trustees are. Well, they have to have a lot of assumptions in here. And so this is incredibly interesting to me. The future income and expenditures of the trust fund will depend on many factors, including the size and characteristics of the population receiving benefits, the level of monthly benefit amount, the size of the workforce, the level of covered workers' earnings. These factors then will depend in turn on future birth rates, death rates, immigration, marriage, divorce rates, retirement age patterns, disability incidence, employment rates, productivity gains, wage increases, inflation, interest rates, and many other demographic, economic, and program-specific factors. So many things going into this recipe. So many things. And you pull on one, what does it do to the other? It's just incredibly interesting. This table right here represents the key demographic, economic, and programmatic assumptions for three alternative scenarios. The intermediate assumption reflects the Social Security's trustees' best estimates and future experience. Therefore, most of the figures in this overview present outcomes under the intermediate assumptions only. Oh, man, I just went back. Can I go back here? Yeah, there we go. For the only. Any projection of the future is, of course, uncertain. For this reason, the Social Security, the trustees also present results under low-cost and high-cost alternatives to provide a wide range of possible future experience. The actual future costs are unlikely to be extreme as these portrayed by the low or high cost projections. Interesting. A separate section on the uncertainty projection begins on page 18. All right, so let's see. So they're saying intermediate total fertility rate, and this is for 2027 and beyond, the long term. The short term, we're fine until 2020, actually 2000, was it 20? I can't remember. We're fine for the next 10 years. Total fertility rate. The intermediate cost is 2 children per woman from 2027 and beyond. The low cost, the more favorable for us, relying on Social Security, is each woman will have more children, an average 2.2 as opposed to 2. All right, does that make sense? The high cost, which means each woman will have less than 2 children starting in 2027. The high cost means there's less workers put into the system. Average, let's see here, average annual percentage and reduction in total age, sex, adjusted death rates. And you can see here the low cost is 0.41, the intermediate cost is 0.77, and the high cost is 1.15. All right, so the average annual reduction in total age, sex, adjusted death rates. So that just, I think that means more people are dying under the low cost than in the high cost. Less people are dying, so they're living longer. Average annual net immigration, and they got net immigration is in the low cost 1.6 million, which would help with the fertility. I mean, you can see all this. Here's the interesting productivity. Total U.S. productivity is 1.98 in the low cost, 1.38 in the high cost. So the more productive we are as a society, the better the Social Security solvency is. And this is average wage increase, huh? You remember the AWI we talked about? And remember, Social Security Trustees report has, not Social Security, your benefit is based on AWI. I just did a video on that. And while you're working, how your benefit is indexed is based on the average wage index. The intermediate is 3.8% for the average wage indexing amount. The high benefit, the high, not cost, but the benefit, which equals to the low cost, means your average wage index is increasing by 5%. So, your wages as an increase help Social Security. The low is 2.58. So the average wage index, again, that's what we use to determine the indexing factor of your employment while you are working, Right now it's 3.8, but if we get better results for labor, and we just had some pretty interesting numbers on that the other day, by the way, for blue collar workers, seeing a pretty significant jump in their wages. That's good. All right, so now here's a CPI. Now, isn't this interesting? You think CPI would be a bad thing, inflation. Here's a trustees report using 2.6, but here's the lowest cost, the low cost using 3.2. So if we have a higher inflation, which leads to higher wage indexes, we actually have less of a burden on Social Security. Isn't that interesting? If we go down to 2% inflation, that hurts Social Security. It hurts a big time for sure. Interesting, huh? Average difference between the two, the average wage index and the CPI. So average wage index on the low cost, which is what we want, is the wages are growing by 5, but inflation is only growing by 3. That means we have a 1.82% differential between the high cost, between the wages that you're making and what you're actually getting to keep when it comes to inflation. So 1.2 is the intermediate, 1.82 is the low cost, the good, and 0.58 is the high cost, which means our wages are growing smaller. Even though our inflation is smaller, there's not as big of a gap between them. Now, here's the interesting thing. Unemployment rate, 5.5 for the intermediate, 4.5 for the low cost, and 6.5 for the high cost. And remember, I just showed you the chart, the difference between the intermediate and the high cost. It wasn't that far in terms of when we're running out of trust fund assets. And the low cost, or the high cost says a 6.5% unemployment. The low cost says only 4.5. And where are we right now? We're definitely more towards here for sure. Real interest rate, again, that'd be as attributed to interest rates across the board. It probably, I guess you could look at long-term bonds. 3.2 on the low cost, 2.7 on the intermediate, and 2.2 on the high. So that is an interesting thing there for sure about the low cost and high cost. All right, so I find that interesting, the interest rate that they're using. All right, so that's the 3 assumptions. And so as we go back to that last chart, we say, what is the biggest assumption we can make? Well, they're using the one for a 2.7% interest rate, a 2.6% inflation rate, an annual wage index of 3%, 3.8, 2 children per woman, 1.2 million, I guess, net immigration, and from 2018 average net annual per, is that, I can't, 1.2 million, and he says it's pretty interesting actually. So, and then we got disability as well they use there too. So the 3 assumptions, and I tell you, what we want is we want more growth. We get more growth all solved. We get more growth to come closer to this number right here. Average unemployment being lower, average wage index increasing, being higher, and even Social Security or CPI inflation being higher, and even higher interest rates is a good thing. So higher interest rates, higher inflation, higher wage increases, and higher productivity, and higher children per woman is a beneficial thing too. But at the end of the day, even if the intermediate reigns supreme, just pay $70 more a month in taxes, and we're done. We're done. That's it. Nothing to be scared about. Nothing. So stop listening to the naysayers. It doesn't make sense. All right. Hope this helps. Subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.